All right, everybody, and we're back with part two of chapter 13, Achieving Energy Sustainability. And in part two, we're going to look at how we can use less energy. And so the first section will be about the benefits of energy conservation and efficiency. And then the part two will be about sustainable design. And our objective after we finish this section is that we should be able to describe strategies to conserve energy and increase energy efficiency. So let's talk. What steps can we take to use less energy? First thing we have to understand is the term energy conservation, and that encompasses a lot of different ways that are all designed to use less energy. So to reduce the consumption level. Okay. Um, as a quick example, we can lower the thermostat during the winter or drive fewer miles. Both of those steps will help us to conserve energy. So energy conservation has to do with using less. Energy efficiency has to do with getting the same result from using a smaller amount of energy. So for example, if our end result is trying to light up a room and we're using light bulbs to do that, that end result is going to be the same. So we want the same result, which means that we want the room to be bright, we want it to be lit up, but we can do that using a smaller amount of energy. So we're going to get the same result, but use a smaller amount of energy. And we can do that by using either CFLs or LED lights. And we'll talk about both of those, and I'll show you some examples of those in class. So those are two alternatives to using the traditional incandescents. We can also encourage lower energy use. In a minute, we're going to look at some personal choices and some personal things that each of us as individuals can do. But the government and industry can also offer incentives to use a lower amount of energy. And that can include taxing electricity, oil, and natural gas to discourage their use. So if the electricity is produced by using a non-renewable energy resource, that electricity could cost more or could be taxed. Tax credits could also be offered to businesses that use less energy. So if there were some type of tiered scale or system that was set up so that depending on the size of the business, certain businesses were given tax credits if they stayed within their energy allotment. That also kind of ties into a tiered rate system for electricity. And a tiered rate system for electricity is when customers are going to pay a low rate for the first increment of electricity they use, and then pay a higher rate as their use goes up. So again, what that means is that each paying customer is going to be given a certain amount of electricity, and that could be dependent on per person, whether it's just you at home, or maybe a husband and a wife, maybe a family, maybe each person that's part of the household is given a certain amount of electricity, and that's a low rate for all that electricity that they're allotted. But anything over the allotment rate, higher rates, that electricity would cost higher for going above the allotment. So those are some incentives that the government could offer. These are personal choices and personal individual decisions that we can do to use less energy. Starting at the top with our home, weatherize, insulate, seal gaps. That has to do with our house and the amount of heat and that we're going to be losing in the wintertime. Turning the thermostat down in the winter and up in the summer. So again, in the winter, instead of having the thermostat set at 75, try 70, try 69 or 68 on the thermostat, and try to really use the AC in the summertime only when you've got the extreme heat waves, or maybe only between 12 o'clock and noon. I'm sorry, 12 and noon. This is the same thing. Noon and 2 o'clock when the heat is the most intense. Reduce the use of hot water. Do laundry in ice cold water. Take short showers. Replace incandescent bulbs with complex fluorescents. Those are the CFLs or the LEDs. And again, we'll talk about those in class. Transportation, walk or ride a bike, carpool, public transportation, consolidate trips. I know, when my parents were growing up, we would always consolidate our trips. And so we would take our trip to the mall, and we would take our trip to Target, and and we would combine that with going out to the movies. We would do all that in one big trip, so that if Billy has to go get shoes at one store, and then the family goes out, buys shoes for Billy, and then comes back home, and then Susie says, "Oh, hey, I need a new blouse for school," and they go back to the store and get a blouse. So that's using more energy. So if we can consolidate all of our trips, or all of our errands into fewer trips, that will save energy. Electrical devices, Energy Star appliances. We're going to take a look at some of the math in this chapter at the amount of electricity that we're going to use. Unplug when possible, or use a power strip, and also use a laptop rather than a desktop computer. Those are some other steps that we can take. So some benefits of conservation and energy efficiency. So why should we do this? Some good things. First of all, many energy companies have an extra backup source of energy available to meet the peak demand. So our peak demand of electricity, that's the greatest quantity of energy that's used at one time, okay? So our electricity grid, our whole system, that has to be designed to be able to provide enough energy to all the people that want it at that peak time. And peak demand can change, and it does change on a 24-hour basis. Usually peak demand is from the afternoon to the early evening and into the late evening hours when everybody's home. The kids come home from school, mom and dad come home from work. The lights go on, the TV goes on, and electricity and energy usage tends to start to go down the later on into the evening that you get, with the lowest demand usually in the overnight hours. There's also something called the variable price structure, and utility customers can pay less to use energy when demand is lowest and more during peak demand. So what that means is that if you're using electricity in the overnight hours when there's low demand, some electric companies will actually charge you less than if you were to reuse that energy and use that electricity during the peak hours, which would be, again, in the early afternoon. So, as an example, if you want to try and conserve energy, you can, run the dishwasher as you go to bed, or run the washing machine as you go to bed, because that'll use a lower amount of electricity because you're using it at the off-peak time. Second part of today is sustainable design. And so sustainable design has to do with improving the efficiency of the buildings we live and we work in. All right. And so if we take a look at this picture here, this is a home, and this incorporates a lot of methods of sustainable design. Okay, this sustainable building here, it incorporates solar orientation as well as some landscaping features, as well as the insulated windows, the walls, the floors. Those are all insulated. And so for buildings in the northern hemisphere, what's going to happen is a southern exposure is going to allow the house to receive more direct rays from the sun in the winter, when the path of the sun is in the southern sky, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But my family, my house actually did that. Like I said, we'll talk about that in a minute. But here we can see that this house is taking advantage of a natural cooling system with a shade tree here. We've got sunlight over here to allow natural sun in the wintertime. We've got our high efficiency windows. We've got adequate insulation and sealing of the cracks in the roof, the siding, and also the basement. Passive solar energy, this is what I was talking about before, where we can use passive solar energy to keep the house warm in the wintertime, and also cooler in the summertime. So using passive solar energy can lower your electricity bill without the need for pumps or other mechanical devices. And so again, the building should have, or the building with the house should have the windows that face in the southern direction. And that's going to allow the sun's rays to warm the house. And again, I'll show you a picture in a minute. And also, when you're building a house, if you're building the house, you want the house to have a high thermal inertia. Thermal inertia is the ability of a material to retain heat or cold. And so if you have your building materials for the house and also for the floor that have a high thermal inertia, that means that the materials are going to stay hot once they're heated, and cool once they're cooled. Oops, that should say cooled, not wooled. Sorry. So again, this picture here shows passive solar heating. So in the wintertime, the sun, again, this is going to be facing the southerly direction here. So if I try this, I'm not quite sure how well it's going to turn out, but again, the windows are going to be facing south. And so in the wintertime, the sun is going to be lower in the sky. So the fact that the southerly windows here allow the sun in the wintertime to shine through the window, and the heat's going to have, the floor is going to have a high thermal inertia down here. So that's going to warm the house in the wintertime. And sure, that it won't warm the house to 75 degrees, but it'll keep the house relatively warm. So that'll be less energy that you have to use to keep the house, at the temperature that you want it. In the summertime, though, if you build your house with the overhang, like right over here, in the summertime the house is higher in the sky, and so that overhang is going to prevent a lot of the heat from entering the window. And so if we prevent that extra heat from entering, that's going to help to try and keep the house cooler as possible, so you don't have to turn on the air conditioning in the summertime. This building here, this is a building, it's called the California Academy of the Sciences, and this is a sustainable design building in San Francisco, and it maximizes the use of natural light and ventilation. It generates a lot of its own electricity with solar panels that are all along the perimeter here. It uses what's called the green roof, so there's actually a little bit of soil and vegetation growing on top, and that acts as a very good insulator. And the whole roofing system also collects rainwater, and it's able to use that as part of the landscaping to water the other to water all the vegetation surrounding it. So we've reached the end of part 2. We've got our 3 checkpoints. How can we use less energy as individuals and as societies, and what are some incentives or consequences that can be associated with those? For 2, what is peak demand and how does it relate to energy conservation? And number 3, how can building design contribute to energy conservation and efficiency? So take some time now and get these checkpoints answered, and when you're finished with part 2, you can go ahead and move on to part 3.